Welcome to MedHeads, the weekly show that brings a biopsychosocial focus to issues of the day, along with special guests who will showcase their expertise and enthusiasm about their field of practice. Your host, Dr. Fergal Armstrong.
Hello, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to this episode of MedHeads. And we continue our series on human need with Dr. Andrew Rees. Hello Andrew, how are you?
Hello, Fergal. Thank you for having me back.
It's great to hear you again and to see you again. So, talk us through the case vignette that we were working on in the last episode.
So we're talking about an Aboriginal gentleman who is trying to deal with his alcohol use disorder. He's got pretty significant psychosocial needs. It's not entirely clear to us yet, I think, whether or not he's got access to sustenance and a safe place to be. But mostly he's got intergenerational trauma. He's a member of the stolen generation. He has no access to his country. He has no access to his people, his language, his culture. And he's really quite adrift, I think. But we've yet to explore that.
Yeah. So as I've said before, this is not an atypical presentation, a highly complex patient with an alcohol use disorder that really is the tip of the iceberg, below which we see all of this trauma and displacement. Now, we were working our way through Max-Neef's basic needs. So just a very quick recap of the SPEW craft mnemonic that lists the 10 needs. If you want to just list those for us.
Certainly. Sustenance, protection, engagement, wisdom, status, creativity, rest, affection, freedom, and transcendence. Okay.
Now, we kind of did the first half of that, the SPEWs bit, in a previous episode. So I thought today we'd focus on the craft. So creativity, rest, affection, freedom, and transcendence. And how would each of those elements apply to this patient that we're looking after? So first of all, creativity. How does creativity impact upon his life?
Well, creativity has been identified as a basic human need.
Yeah.
We, as fairly privileged people, I suppose, have ample opportunity to do that, don't we? Right now I'm sitting in a room surrounded by my musical instruments, and you're engaging in the creation of MedHeads, which is going to be beneficial to a number of people, I trust. And so that's really important to both of us, and we get to enjoy that, and we get the rewards of doing that. For this man, well, we need to ask him what's important to him. And when we're looking at all of these needs, they all intermesh, they all bounce off each other, they're all being interacting, they all interact one with another as the person's approaching this thing. So, his creativity might be related to him getting some support from a local Aboriginal group and finding his way to be in contact with his mob. To engage, for example, in painting or music or dance and so on. Some yarning.
So explain what yarning is to us.
Yeah, so yarning is basically, it's storytelling. Yarning can relate to Dreamtime. Behind me on the wall you'll see Tiddalik, the frog, the greedy fellow who drank all the water and the various animals tried to make him laugh. And eventually the eel, which you see in the bottom corner, just over my shoulder, tried to dance but ended up wrapping himself in a knot, and Tiddalik laughed so much that he vomited up all the water and returned it. And the tale is about not being selfish and various other matters, far too deep for me to go into here, but very important to quite a number of tribal groups around Australia.
Yeah. So yarning is part of tribe engagement, mob communication, and for this gentleman it may actually be part of his need for creativity, is the ability to enjoy a story or even tell a story or his story. That would be part of
Indeed.
That in fact could be part of his therapeutic journey, couldn't it?
Indeed, and his wisdom, of course,
Yes.
and his transcendence. So transcendence is this idea of, well, it could include passing on to the next generation, leaving a legacy.
Yes.
So then if he has a vision in his life of being an uncle, that is a respected elder in the Aboriginal community, he will be taking the young ones aside and teaching them the important stories of culture and helping them to have wisdom and understanding and knowledge of who they are and where they sit and so on. And so suddenly it becomes a great boon, a great boost to him and helps him, I trust, on his therapeutic journey.
So I've heard you speak in other fora about dreams, and you have a quotation about dreams, which I'm not going to try and quote. What do you say about dreams?
Well, the idea is that it's good to dream. Obviously, we dream in our sleep, but it's really about a vision of how things might be. What is the ideal? What is our dream scenario? What will our life look like when all of this is fixed?
Yeah.
And it can be very beneficial to get a patient to narrate in detail what things will look like when it's better.
Yeah. If you don't have dreams...
So the quote...
Sorry, go on. You tell us the quotation.
So the quote is, if you don't have a dream, how will you know that your dream has come true?
Yeah, that's so true. So, I mean, I think in this context, I think having a dream is part of that transcendence. Would you not agree?
Well, I think it's a component because you've got to have some sort of picture of where you're going to be, what you're going to do. But it could also, your dream future could be about your engagement. You know, I will be employed. Okay, what will it look like when you have a job? You know, it's not just enough to say, I will be employed. Well, I want to be a truck driver's offsider. And how will that look? Well, how will it start when you start the day? Well, I'll go and get myself ready and I'll shave and I'll put my uniform on and, you know, and then the patient is building step by step exactly what their vision is for what their ideal life will be. And then they know where they're going to work or what they're going to work toward.
Yeah. But the dream could also be about identity. And, you know, that identity, as you say, could be something like, I want to be a respected elder. I want to be able to pass on my experience, my experiential wisdom, which goes back to wisdom. You know, I mean, wisdom is not just book work, is it? You know, wisdom is life experience, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, it's the can, it's the knowing, it's the even little bits like what's your attitude as you approach a problem.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked about creativity, the R, and we've also talked about T for transcendence. And as you say, you know, all of these elements intermingle, so it's difficult to tease them out, you know, completely. But the R in Spewcraft is rest. So let's talk about how rest impacts, or the lack of rest impacts upon this gentleman.
Well, a lack of rest, of course, could mean a lack of sleep, and that's obviously going to really negatively affect cognition and negatively affect mood. But it also can be that we need to have time to just pull aside from whatever is pressing upon us and just have a think about stuff and just have a little bit of joy in our lives, engage in a bit of play, all of those sorts of things. They're very important.
So I think of solace for the soul and the relief of suffering when I think of rest in a bigger, more holistic view. I don't, as you say, you know, rest is sleep, but it's also, I suppose, a freedom from restlessness, which is much, much bigger than that. And you know, in the context of someone who's going through disconnection from his tribe and trauma, I can only imagine just how much restlessness he has, this constant emptiness and this search for fulfillment.
Well, that's right. And we also talk about, you know, rest and being the opposite of restlessness, but I also think it's a removal of load. You know, if we think of a bridge, you put a truck on the bridge and the bridge is not capable of taking anything over 3.5 tonnes, you're going to break the bridge with your B-double, with your huge semi-trailer. And so giving people rest can be things like, well, the semi-trailers in their life might need to go down a different road, or maybe the bridge needs to be bolstered, or maybe there are other techniques for dealing with the bridge. You know, when they move a big building across the bridge, they can actually unload each individual set of axles as the truck goes over. So there's that simile, that metaphor, I suppose, in people's lives. You know, what strategies do they have for dealing with stress? You know, the company of others, doing some physical exercise and burning off that excess adrenaline, or just stepping aside from things for a minute. Just, you know, things as simple as just having a nap, having a sit, going and singing a favourite song, whatever.
So what I'm hearing is that rest is not necessarily a passive process. It can be an active process whereby we seek actively to offload, de-stress, and connect with others in a more meaningful way. You know, maybe engage in some meditation or, you know, group therapy.
Indeed. All of those things I think are true, and it is all about that enmeshment.
Mm. So then we have A for affection. What do you mean by affection, or rather, what do you understand by affection?
Well, for some people, the idea of affection seems perhaps a bit limited to something akin to physical lovemaking or some kind of intimate relationship. But the affection can be things like, well, brotherly love, the companionship of good friends, you know, your brothers and sisters, your family about you, just decent mates who tell you that, you know, you're okay, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind regard of our tribe, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. And I suppose if we're talking about affection, and you've identified that there are multiple types of love, you know, I mean, you know, there was this Greek concept of, you know, the four kinds of love, which were philos, agape, eros, and storge. And I suppose philos was brotherly love, agape was self-sacrificing love, eros was, you know, sexual love, and storge was, you know, kind regard, or, you know, the kind of affection that you would have for a distant relative. You know, and I suppose storge is the kind of, what I view as the kind of overarching concern for one's tribe, one's mankind. You know, and I suppose the earth, really, if you can extend it to that point. To what extent do you think that these types of love need to be involved with this patient, or at least introduced to this patient?
Well, I think, first of all, I need to ask, not tell. I need to ask and listen. And the patient will make clear to me what he treasures and what's missing in his life. So if, for example, it's about country, he'll tell me. If it's about culture, you know, if he has this desire to engender a love relationship, a loving relationship with his culture and his people, if he then is the respected elder, you know, beloved of the young ones who look at him and, you know, this uncle, he knows everything, well, then that also extends to his abilities in transcendence and so on. Yeah.
And then we have F for freedom. What do you mean by freedom?
Well, freedom's a difficult one, isn't it? Because many people who struggle with these matters, objectively, it would be easy enough to say that they have no freedom. They have little or no resources, and they're somewhat stuck. But they do have some freedoms, and their freedoms can be a freedom to grow as an individual. They have some freedom of choice. They can either go along with stuff or not. You know, when we looking at the situation of somebody who is driven to consume substances, and we look then at those times of exception when they actually find that they don't have to consume a substance. And we build on that because we're looking at the fact that they have a freedom of choice. Whilst they might feel they must drink, they actually find there are times when they don't have to.
Yeah, I often think about choice points when we're talking about, you know, chronic pain or addiction. I think as hard as it might be and as difficult as it might seem to think of these choice points, we are met with choice points in life. So, do we or don't we eat the sugary drink that's going to put on weight, that's going to inflame us, that's going to cause us more points? Do we or don't we take the heroin that we're thinking about because we've been triggered by an old memory or in a familiar place? Do we or don't we reach for the bottle when we're feeling stressed? But again, those choice points are closely associated in my mind with one's resilience. So I see resilience as one of the ways of unlocking the freedom to choose, because when we don't have resilience, then we don't perceive these triggers as choice points, but really we see them as natural we see addictions as the natural consequence of triggers, when in fact that trigger is a choice point. So when that for me, that is a degree of freedom when I look at people with addiction and also chronic pain.
Well, we can think of a rather extreme example, which is that of Viktor Frankl, the Jewish gentleman, a psychiatrist imprisoned in a concentration camp, who, given the opportunity of escaping or providing care to others, actually felt really bad at the idea of escaping from the prison camp, and turned around and actually looked after his patients, and immediately felt a loss of anxiety, because he had made his choice true to his values.
Yes, and he had that freedom. So notwithstanding the surrounding trauma and the constraints within which he was living, he had that freedom of choice which he chose to exercise, which I suppose then links into transcendence. Because we're talking about the choice for self-sacrifice or not. So again, this is another example of how everything is just intertwined. Yeah. So, are there any final comments that you would like to make about hierarchies of need or the list of needs as they apply to this case vignette, Andrew?
I think, first of all, it's our job to listen and not to tell, not to try and use our wisdom upon a patient. But it's useful to inquire, and it's useful to just have these thoughts in the back of the head as we go through a therapeutic session with a patient, and just chipping away here and there, trying to clarify how they're being met. And as they build their picture, and as we ask questions to help them build their picture of this ideal life, just to ensure that wherever possible those things come out and they can be explored and dealt with.
Dr. Andrew Rees, thank you very much for your pearls of wisdom, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.
My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.